Hello guys, welcome to my very early and very on time new season, patch 2.6, total, big brain, 7,000 IQ tier list. In general, the way I make these tier lists is a mix of personal experience, talking to other players, looking at some match histories, you know, the basics. And so I just try and gather as much information as possible. And I will say that I do weight this towards my opinion rather than the opinion of everybody else, but it does help me kind of curate some ideas for the tier list. And speaking of which, I did not mean to put Galio below Teemo. That's just sacrilege. So, thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. Reference link in the description below. Let's take a look now at the Baron lane tier list that I'm starting off with. And I will be honest, not a huge amount has shifted, in my opinion, on the last patch. I'll talk about a couple of standouts. Obviously, Fiora remains one of the best Baron lane champs in the game. She hasn't been touched for patches. And I think still, if you're a good Fiora player, I think there is almost no matchups that are bad for you, realistically. I think Renekton still stands as an incredibly solid, viable sort of a Baron lane pick. Really good pretty much at all stages of the game. Very, very, very strong champion. Down in S tier, these are champions that... and the big new addition is Jace. I actually really do rate Jace now. I think the Edge of Night edition plus the changes that he's had to his kit has made him a super viable damage-dealing carry. The only kind of qualm that I have is that I think his cannon still isn't very strong, but his hammer form is incredibly strong. So in the 1v1, you can actually get a huge amount of damage off, massively outplay people with Jace. And I don't think people massively expect it, especially on the serrated Dirk spike in the laning phase. However, as the game progresses, obviously Jace doesn't want to be diving in headfirst into teamfights with his hammer. He wants to be using his Mercury cannon to poke a little bit more. But the problem is that the cannon form still isn't really that strong, in my opinion. But his hammer form is really strong. And I think Jace actually is in a really good spot now. And I've played Jace quite a few times in Baron lane, and I think he is pretty good. I think Camille is still an incredibly solid choice. I think Riven's still a great pick. I think Gragas is still one of the safest Baron lane picks if you're just looking to have someone, especially with the recent changes, especially if you're just having to look, either have a tanky pick or a relatively reliable AP pick in the Baron lane. Still believe Gragas is super high tier in that respect. A+ tier. Malphite, very safe. Can't go too wrong with Malphite, realistically. There aren't many matchups that he does particularly badly into, and you can play AP into certain matchups where you want to try and abuse them. I like to play AP into Fiora. I like to play AP into Kayle, especially into Kennen. But otherwise, he's a great tank pick, very good anti-AD. Irelia, solid. Garen, I'm actually going to put Irelia behind Garen and Darius. Not that I don't really order it from left to right, realistically. But I really think Garen is kind of smoothing his way back into the meta a little bit. I think people have sort of said, oh, wait a second, Garen's still pretty viable. Garen's still a strong pick. And I still rate Garen as, again, another pretty good blind pick in the Baron lane. Darius, pretty strong, pretty, good, I would say a good blind pick in the same way Garen is. There aren't too many terrible matchups for Darius, and he's always going to remain relatively useful in the game. Irelia, Pantheon, and the big one is Kayle. A lot of people would be like, Kayle's turbo broken right up here. But I think the problem is with Baron lane, it's so easy if you're a good player. It's so easy to... And I'm going to give you a tip right here. If you're in lower elos or, you're wondering how to deal with Kayle, if you're playing any of these champions, even a lot of these champions, if you're playing any of these champions, the best time to attack Kayle is any time before level 10. Especially pre-level 5. Obviously, post-level 5, you have to be a little bit careful because she's got the ult. But, any time in the laning phase that you can just attack Kayle, do it. Because she sucks pre-level 5. The biggest strategies that I've seen to deal with Kayle have been people like Riven, where they'll zone you away from the minion wave because you can't step up to it because they'll just attack you. They'll stack the wave, which means they build a big minion wave up, and then they'll slowly push the tower, and then they'll ask their jungler for a gank and dive you. Because you've been zoned, you're level 2 or 3, and they're level 4, maybe even 5, and they just kill you. And then you lose all those minions, and you're massively behind at that point. So that's been a good way to deal with Kayle. However, I do admit, once Kayle gets 2 items, has hit level 9 or 10, she does become really strong. I do think that Runans made her feel stronger than she was, and there is a bug that's getting fixed with Runans right now, which is going to lower her damage output. I believe it was that she was proccing on-hit effects twice with the Runan bolts, which is why her Runans bolts were just doing ridiculous damage. They were not supposed to. And so, like, I do think her teamfight power is going to get reduced a little bit with the Runans fix. I think Kayle is one of those picks that in low elo is going to stomp because you don't know how to deal with her, but in higher elos, I think it's a little bit harder to make her work consistently. I like to call my A tier like just good picks. Like, they're not insane, they're not absolutely like nutty busted, but like they all have their own roles, and you're never going to feel too sad seeing one of these picks in the Baron lane, right? Mundo, the reworked Mundo, I do think is pretty strong, so I've bumped him up. I've not put him up in this busted tier because I don't think he is. I think the thing with Mundo is that he very much has this fantasy of he goes where he pleases. He's this unkillable tank, but I do think he's quite easy to kill. I still think, you know, you just put Grievous Wounds into your kit, and Mundo does become significantly easier to deal with. So I would say that I don't think Mundo is like nutty busted, but I do think he's significantly better than he was previously. I saw an Akshan top from a player I played with recently, and he's relatively solid. I do think Akshan is better mid and AD carry, but you know, Akshan top can work. And down here, these are like the niche picks. Like Jarvan is a niche pick. You play him like summon Airy. You just spam your first ability to deal with like the Dariuses of the world, and you can actually play it into Fiora as well. Jarvan's like a good counter pick, but again, not a pick that I'd want to play every single game. And like Vayne is a counter pick. Nasus is kind of like a meme pick in my opinion. I'd say that Yasuo is a bit of a counter pick in the Baron lane. Obviously, Teemo sucks. We're even going to move him down. Screw you, Teemo. Even though he's not that bad. I would say that Teemo is actually not that bad of a champion. Good Teemo players can be incredibly obnoxious to deal with in the laning phase, but just in team fights, he's so useless. And, you know, eventually he gets outscaled in the side lane as well. And again, I think that Galio is like a very specific counter pick. Jungle is still like Lee Sin Kha'Zix's kingdom, in my opinion. I think like I see these guys banned a lot, especially Lee Sin. He gets banned pretty much all the time. But these two are still like king of the hill when it comes to the jungle meta. I think below that you have things like the Nunu, the Rivens, the Rengars. I've actually moved Olaf up because I've seen a lot of Olaf recently, and he's been really strong. Like, he's been doing really, really well, Olaf. And so I think Olaf deserves maybe a slightly higher tier than I've been giving him recently. He's been playing really well. A+, I'm actually really liking Gragas jungles that I'm seeing right now. I do think he's better in Baron lane in general. I think he's actually quite good in support as well. But I think, like, I've been seeing quite a lot of Gragas jungle, and he's pretty solid, you know? I think he's pretty solid. Graves, the nerf hit him a little bit. I moved him down from S tier. I think actually, you know, he's still really solid though. Like, it was like a tiny love tap of a nerf on Graves. Evelynn up here because she's still one of the only strong AP junglers that we have in the entire game. Maybe bar Nunu, but you don't really play Nunu AP. Fiora is a good jungle. Like, as much as people might want to meme it, she is a relatively good jungle. Wukong's still very serviceable. I think Wukong, again, I don't really rate these guys by like left to right, but Wukong should be a bit higher. Pantheon should be a bit lower here. Xin Zhao did get some buffs, and I'm wondering whether Xin Zhao's stronger than I'm giving him credit for, but I'm just tentatively putting him in A+ right now because I haven't seen a huge amount of him yet. But it could be that Xin Zhao is very much back in meta. We'll just have to see. Jarvan, again, Jarvan is what I call the benchmark jungle. Like, if you're better than Jarvan, you're in like the good tiers. If you're lower than Jarvan, you're not in the good tiers. Jarvan's like the very bog standard jungle. There's nothing special about him, but he does a good job. Generally is a pretty solid tanky jungle. Jax, even though with the Horizon Cup may have shown you otherwise, playing Jax jungle requires a very specific style and a very specific set of coordination. If you don't play the way that Dakun Gaming play Jax, then you are just playing kind of a low-income Jax in the jungle, which I don't think is very good. Ever since the Camille nerf, she doesn't feel particularly strong in the jungle. Putting Morgana in here, I think Morgana is a very serviceable AP jungle. She's a little weak, and I think loses a lot of duels and has to play obviously at range, but and obviously relies pretty much exclusively on her binding realistically to make ganks happen. But I think that Morgana is a good jungle, and I think, you know, she will get played a decent amount. Reworked Mundo, solid, definitely better than he was before. I was debating putting Rammus a bit higher. I know that I think, having had conversations with people, his win rate stats are actually higher, but I just have this thing against Rammus. So I'm not sure I really want Rammus any higher than A tier. I think he is a very good low elo jungler though. I think he's strong as well. I do think he's a strong jungler, so maybe he deserves slightly higher than A tier, but he's a solid jungler. Tryndamere, Fizz, ever since the nerfs, has not been that strong. I'm putting Kayle in here because I think Kayle could be a good jungler, but the problem is I've not seen her tested enough to give you a really solid opinion. So just putting you know that this Kayle pick could move up. I'm just saying that because you don't have to deal with the crappy early game. You get some good help on your first buff and you'll be fine for clearing. You can rush level 5 pretty easily. Like, it feels like Kayle could be better in the jungle than she is in the lane, but I just haven't seen her tested enough to give you a good opinion. But just know that Kayle could be better than the A tier that I'm giving her. Even with the changes, I do think Amumu's not that strong in the jungle. I think he's easy to deal with, although I do think his ganks have got a little better now that he's got a double bandage toss available to him. Shyvana, I would put her in D tier if I could. I've had so many Shyvanas since the patch that are still just... It's like the worst jungler, man. I hate Shyvana so much. Just personal vendetta against this champion. I don't think she's very good. Cool, let's move on to mid. So, some people might be saying, why is Zed not here, given how much you complain about him? And I think the self-reflection part of me says that Zed probably can be dealt with, and he probably isn't as good, but in high elo, when you get a Zed player, they just generally tend to destroy the game, so I ban him every game, and it's more of a personal opinion about Zed. You know, if I was putting him here, this would be like purely my personal opinion based on the experiences that I've had, but I know that it is possible to deal with Zed. So, you know, I think he's good, and I don't think the nerfs massively changed his power level, honestly, especially because he got a new item that he can use. And I still think Zed is very good. My personal opinion is the three best, you know, mid laners are Galio, Orianna, and Diana. I really think Galio is just like such a solid pick. Even with the nerfs that he's had over a couple of patches, he's just really solid, has very, very few totally bad matchups. Bad matchups include AD matchups, which are like Zed, Akshan, and Yasuo. But he's so good at dealing with, like, even ranged AP carries. He has a bad time versus Orianna in the laning phase, but you can just clear waves. It's not that hard to play Galio into a bad matchup, honestly. Great team fight impact, great roaming potential. Really like Galio. I don't know why to put TF that far down. Orianna, super solid. I think has kind of moved, because the nerfs that have happened to other champions, has kind of moved back to as like a super safe queen of the mid lane. Love Diana, although she isn't played as much as you would think for an S+ tier champion, in my opinion. I just think Diana is super strong. S tier, Corki, very reliable. Gets played AD carry more, if at all, but he's just still very reliable. Great pick. Zed, as I've talked about. I don't think the Ziggs nerfs have hurt as hard as maybe you would think, but I do think a lot of Ziggs now have to build tier. But he still scales incredibly well. I've still been battered around by Ziggs, you know, in games. And again, he's still super safe. The difference between one bomb is not a huge amount, even though I thought it was going to be bigger than it was. But I think Ziggs is still very, very solid. Akshan, great. I mean, Katarina is still annoying as ever. I've moved Yasuo up slightly because I've seen... I think Yasuo is kind of a really, really solid pick. You've got to also remember that Banshees, I think Banshees has made Orianna a much safer mid laner as well. Like, it's always been a pretty core item on her on the PC. And so Banshees has made her safer. I also think Banshees is a great item for Banshee's Veil is a great item for Galio as well. And it's a great item for Diana. Even though Rod of Ages got nerfed, they actually got... It's only nerfed by 2.5 minutes, and they got a new item that I think works really well for these types of champions. Like, Banshees is great for Diana, and it's great for Galio. I'm putting Kayle in S in mid. I actually think Kayle is best played mid compared to any other area. Obviously, you do have to play safe versus ranged AP champions. Of course you do. But it's much harder to freeze a wave in mid. It's much harder to dive a tower in mid. And I think in general, you can play much safer in the mid lane than you can in the Baron lane. And so I think Kayle's probably way better mid than she is in the Baron lane. I've moved TF down. I think the nerfs have hit him pretty hard, and I don't think I've seen anywhere near as much TF. I've put Jace in a pretty good spot. I think Jace is in a good spot right now, and I think in mid as well, he's pretty viable. Morgana, I put A+. I do not think Morgana is a particularly good mid pick. The benefit of Morgana is that you can use your pool on the wave, you clear it almost instantly, and then you can roam, or you can get some vision, or you can join your jungler, right? But as an actual AP carry mid, I don't think she's that good. I actually think she's kind of weak. But she's very, very good at just pushing lanes, and I think she pushes lane harder than any other champion on this list. So if you want to keep an enemy at their tower, Morgana's like the best champion to do that. I've moved Vigar down. He is so bad early game. Like, honestly, even with the buffs, I still think Vigar really sucks. So I've moved him down ever so slightly. Other than that, no major changes to the mid lane list. AD carry. Only big changes that you're going to see to AD carry here is I still think Lucian and Varus are the best AD carries right now. I've moved Caitlyn up. I think I underrated Caitlyn on the last patch, and even with the nerf to her ultimate, which honestly isn't a huge deal for Caitlyn in general, I think she's still a very obnoxious AD carry to deal with in the laning phase. People, especially with the Morgana release, Caitlyn Morgana in the bot lane is really annoying to deal with. And I think a very, very strong lane in general. So Kate Morgana is a great lane. Other than that, the AD carry tier list won't have changed a huge amount. I've moved Miss Fortune up because I think Miss Fortune actually is slightly better with the buffs that she's had. I've moved Kai'Sa down. I think Kai'Sa, unfortunately, is just dropping out of the meta a little bit. People always complain about my placement of Tristana, but I do think I think I had her in B tier previously, but I think A tier is a very, very, very solid placement for Tristana. So I've moved her up slightly. I do recognize that Tristana and Lulu, for instance, is a great combo. But I just don't think Tristana is as good as some of the other AD carries on the list, especially when, I think Jinx Lulu's better. I think Vayne Lulu's better. I think Kai'Sa Lulu's better. Like there are other options that I think are a little better. Ashe with the buffs. Trust me, I've played enough games with Stuart to tell you that it is still garbage. Man, I hate Ashe. In competitive, I think she's better, but I think in solo queue she's just not that good. But that's the main part of this AD carry tier list. We'll move on to the support tier list now. Forgot to include my boy Amumu. I actually think Amumu is potentially a sleeper OP support. I've played Amumu with Aftershock, taking Bandage Toss level 1, and you go all in at level 1 with a really strong level 1 AD carry, and it's very difficult to deal with. Plus, it's a great way of dealing with enchanters. But I'm not going to start saying he's like Galio and Leona level. I think Leona's probably a little... I don't know. I found it really difficult to put Leona in this tier. She deals with Senna so well, but Senna is, in general, has got so many good pairings and works really well as a support with fasting builds. But I think Leona's in a really good spot. I really wanted to put her in S tier, but I'm going to just settle with her at the top of A+ tier. I think Nami and Lulu still remain as queens of the support meta right now. Nami is super strong in the laning phase. Lulu's obviously core with some of the AD carries that are really strong right now. So I think Nami and Lulu are really good. I think Morgana is a very strong support, and I think she's better support than she is in any other role. Especially because I think Black Shield is a super powerful ability in the game right now. She's got very strong lane presence. She can push lane really well as well. I really, really rate Morgana support. Braum, Janna, Rakan, Thresh, Senna, all still back in that good tier. A+ is, as I said, I was thinking about putting Leona top, but then I think these are all these, strong engagey tank supports like Galio and Alistair. In A tier, you've got things like the Blitzcrank, which I like Blitzcrank into some enchanter matchups. I like Blitzcrank into Nami. I like Blitzcrank into Lulu, for instance. But obviously, you have to hit your hooks to make it work. I think Vigar's support terrible. I know Vigar's support is okay, but I think he's much better played either as an AD carry or in mid. Soraka's heal buff probably didn't change her a huge amount. I think Brand does... I don't know. I think Brand probably deserves slightly higher than A. I think Brand's probably better in A+ now that I think about it. He is a very strong AP carry support, honestly. A good Brand player can kind of dominate the game from the support role, but I don't think he's something that I'd pick every single game. The S and the S+ picks are the ones that this is the crop of supports that I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to pick, and Leona probably falls into that slightly. But I do think I'm usually picking Leona into a matchup where I want to engage or I have an aggressive support, whereas Braum I'm picking all the time. Rakan I'll pick in most matchups, right? So yeah, that's my support tier list. I do still think the ones that you want to climb with are the likes of Braum, Morgana, Nami, Lulu, Janna. If you're a good Thresh player, Thresh. If you're a good Senna player, Senna and Rakan as well. These are the ones that I'd like to climb. I'd be looking to climb with. Whereas I think Brand's a little too coin flip for me. As is Lux. You can have a really good game on Lux, or you can have a really bad game on Lux, and I don't think there's much leeway there. Whereas with Braum, there's so much leeway to have a bad game, because you're always going to be useful, right? Braum doesn't need gold to be useful. He just has a useful kit. Whereas I think Lux and Brand and Seraphine, they all need gold to be good. So if you have a bad game, they just become worse than useless. So yeah, that's my thoughts. That's the tier list, guys. 20 minutes long, new season. Go and climb some bloody elo, you madmen, and I'll see you soon.